Hello, everyone. So we don't have anyone joining live, so it'll just be people watching in the replay. So I knew that it would take the presentation would be shorter because of that. So what I was actually thinking is that I will re-record yesterday's as well because the audio was really patchy on that, and I really want you to be able to hear what we talk about, so that when you brainstorm yours, it's clear. And so yeah, they yesterday's won't take as long either. But if you are watching this and you've already watched yesterday or you were there yesterday, you can just skip ahead to the second day, to day two. But then for those of you who haven't heard day one, you might want to watch this one instead because it will have better audio and just more clarity. If you would like to see it being workshopped a little bit and brainstormed, that you will that you can access in the recording that we have from yesterday. So this one will just be essentially me going through the slides so that you're clear on that. So I'm going to start from the beginning and then go through from day one and day two. Okay, so I'm just going to be sharing my screen, getting all that up. Awesome. Okay. Hopefully that's all working because I do not have anyone to tell me if my audio crashes or if my video crashes. So let's hope that 2 hours later I'm not re-recording this. Okay. Awesome. So let me just go back. Okay. So becoming day one. So an introduction to me. So many of you may know me, especially if you watched yesterday's, but I'm a chiropractor. I practiced for about 7 years in private practice. I worked in various part-time locum jobs. I owned my own practice for a while. I did a bit of volunteer work at World Spine Care, and I worked in a busy practice in the Netherlands as a full-time employee for 3 years. So I've experienced different types of practices, different practice environments, um, and sorry, just checking that out the right notes up here. So I had a lot of frustrations, a lot of stress in practice. I was a very anxious chiropractor. I constantly was learning. I constantly was taking new courses. I never felt like I knew enough to justify seeing patients. I struggled in my own practice. So there were many things that I struggled with as a clinician. Um, and one of the things was that I got frustrated with how much I was able to help patients. I wanted to help them in a deeper way, in a wider way, in a way that had, in my perception, more impact on their life. And at the time, I was practicing in the Netherlands, and many of my patients were experiencing chronic stress and burnout. So I decided to do a health coaching certification to be able to help my patients more. And I chose one that, oh, this is why I'm confused because it's not showing up here. And I chose one that had a specific focus on sleep, stress management, and recovery. So that I did through Precision Nutrition. I had also already had a personal experience or multiple personal experiences with coaching. So I had some sense like, oh, I really like this coaching thing. And I remember when I first saw the description of health coach, I think it was on a documentary or something like that. I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, that's a thing. Like, how cool is that? That is what I want to do. So I had like some sense that, this is what I wanted to be doing. But when I actually did the certification and I started coaching people, I really realized that this was it. This is the thing I'm meant to be doing. And when I started my own health coaching practice, initially the health coaching was just to, like I said, help my patients more. But when I started my own health coaching practice, I realized the people that I most wanted to help were fellow clinicians. And so I became a coach for healthcare professionals, and I coach on health and career. So I kind of think of those as the two layers. So I'm helping clinicians step into their zone of genius, their niche, bringing their unique gifts to the world that is a combination of who they are, their experiences that they've had, their philosophies about healthcare. And I'm helping them step into that and imagine something bigger for themselves than maybe they thought was possible or that they dared to admit that they wanted. And I like to say that happy and healthy clinicians change the world. And when I say like stepping into something bigger, I don't necessarily mean like you have to save the world and you have to like have this huge mission that is just going to like impact every person on the whole planet and save all the animals and save all the humans. It can also be just, or let me rather say, it's more about being in alignment with who you are. And I think of the idea of, from Brene Brown, the idea of true belonging, like you truly finding your thing, your place in this world, and you bringing those things to other people as well. So it's almost like when you're happy and healthy, the ripple effect is on other people's lives, even if it's not necessarily that you know, doing this huge mission. It doesn't have to be a big mission. I will chat a little bit more at the end about the work that I do, how you can work with me, letting you know a little bit more about that. So all of that to say that I both understand how you feel because I've been a clinician, I've practiced in different environments, I've struggled with all of the things. I know why our brain does the things that it does as well. So while I have experienced being a clinician, and then I also have gone further and understood why our brain does the things that it does and why we feel the way that we do, why we burn out, why we feel exhausted, why we experience imposter syndrome and perfectionism and people pleasing and all of that, and what to do about it, most importantly. And why I chose this name and why I wanted to do this workshop. The name Becoming, which you will sort of see as we're going through this workshop, is about we're pursuing our goals in a way that is, yes, we want the outcome. Yes, it'll be exciting. Yes, it'll be great to have that outcome. We want to pick something that we genuinely want and that we're excited about pursuing. And also it's about who we are becoming in the process of that. Like, what are the skills you're learning? What are the values you are embodying? How are you learning to actually live your values rather than just, you know, have the ideas that you have those values? How are you becoming someone who maybe takes brave steps, takes bold steps, maybe someone who doesn't let fear hold them back from doing something. Maybe you're becoming someone who is more vulnerable and open and willing to get your heart broken by the world, by your patients, by life, right? Leading with our hearts. So who are you becoming on the way to achieving that goal? And often that just gives us a lot of a stronger reason to start, but also to keep going along that process. That we're not just choosing a random arbitrary goal because we're like, well, maybe we should, I don't know, maybe it's a good thing to do. Maybe we, you know, should do what other people are doing, like other people seem to be going after stuff, so maybe I should just pick something. And sometimes we end up just picking something small or something that we don't really care that much about because we're too scared to go after the thing we really want to go after. And we'll talk about that today, the resistance as well to those things. So this is just an opportunity for us to kind of step back a little bit, take a look at the bigger picture, like what do I really want? Not just like I'm just following the logical next step in my career and this seems like the next thing to do, right? We're taking a step back and we're looking at what do I actually want? Maybe I want to imagine something for myself that I never considered. Maybe it's on a completely different path than I'm actually on right now, right? So we're stepping back, we're looking at what do we actually want? And on the first day, or on this part of the first day of today, we're going to be looking at like choosing the goal and how to move towards the goal. And then in the second part of it, we're talking about the resistance and how we can support ourselves in that. These were just some references that I put here in case you want to look at that. Some of them are books. Some of them are just my coaches, because obviously I'm getting coached all the time. So I also have this kind of amalgamation of all these ideas and concepts. And sometimes I don't even know specifically who what came from. And then the SSRPN, that's just my certification, and then obviously my experience as a clinician and as a coach. So these are just, if you would like to have a look at these resources, you're welcome to. Okay. So why do we set goals? What is the point, right? It's not just because it's January. It's not because we should. It's not because other people are doing it. It's because when we set a direction, when we choose something to go for, we have to clarify our priorities and we have to choose a direction. We have to narrow our focus and think about what do we actually want. When we do that, our brain, our subconscious mind, and conscious mind will start scanning for resources and knowledge. So we will look for things that we need for that goal, right? It's like someone who decides that they are going to move to another country and then they start seeing stuff about that country everywhere, right? That is how our brain works. As soon as we set our intention somewhere, our brain will scan for those things. There are so many things that our brain is taking in all the time, and it needs to filter things out. So it's only going to filter for the things that you tell it to filter for, that you tell it, these are important, look out for these things. And by setting a goal, setting an intention, you do that. One of the, or rather, that is one of the benefits of just doing this process. So even if you don't necessarily do all the things that would make your goal more effective, just being here and just watching this replay, choosing a goal, narrowing your focus, that already gives you value because it already directs your brain in that direction. And you might find that you're actually doing stuff even though you didn't intentionally decide to do it, just because your brain had already orientated in this direction. The third one is just optimism, fun, and creativity. And what I just mean by that is like, it can be fun. It can actually be a cool process. It can be like, I'm moving towards this thing that I want. I'm getting creative on how to get there. I'm getting creative on the options for me. Like maybe I'm considering all these new things that I never considered for myself before. So it can be a fun process. And then the value of the process. So that is that theme of becoming, right? It's not only about the outcome of the goal, but it's also about the process of getting there and how we will develop and grow. And then health and happiness and resilience. So we actually have, sorry, one minute here. It's doing something strange where like goes to the next one. Sorry about that. I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, anyway, so this is the quote that I was trying to find. Having a sense of purpose and meaning in life dramatically improves and sustains our health and resilience in all dimensions. So this is really important to know. This is about your health. This is about your happiness. This is about resilience, right? We need some sort of purpose in our lives. There's a term called languishing, where we just kind of meh about our lives, right? We're not unhappy, but we're also not like excited about anything. And that's one of the things that can really make us just feel unhappy in our careers and unfulfilled, and kind of like this underlying thing of like, I don't know why. I'm not like I can't point to anything terrible in my life, but I'm not like excited about anything. So having that sense of meaning and purpose improves and sustains our health and resilience in all dimensions. And I also mentioned this yesterday, that happiness precedes success. So we often think about, oh, when I get there, when I achieve that outcome, when I do that thing, then I'll be happy. And that's also something to watch out for when you are achieving goals. What do you think is on the other side of that goal? What do you think you're going to feel? What do you think you're going to believe about yourself when you achieve that goal, right? And just knowing that we need to be actually working on our happiness, our well-being, in order to achieve the things that we want to achieve, not put them as they will be on the other side of that. Okay. Awesome. And then the last one was just expanding what is possible, which I talked about a little bit. Is like sometimes we set these small goals because we're too scared to go after the ones that we really want, or we're too scared to even admit that that's what we really want, or there's just a lot of resistance that comes with that. And that's what we'll be addressing today, so that you can actually go after the bigger things that you want, even if you have reasons why that maybe scares you, right? and just expanding what is possible. We often use our past to determine what we should do in the future. And kind of like I was saying as well with we just go to like the next natural step in our career journey, what we think is the next step. Here's an example for me is like, there were points in my career where I was worrying about how I'm going to get more patience in my practice, how I'm going to manage my stress a bit better, how I'm going to learn this thing that I didn't know, like I had a patient and I wanted to learn more about it. And I was so like in the almost like these blinkers on of like, what is the next thing? How can I just get better at what I'm doing? Whereas in that moment, or in that period of my life, what I actually needed was to look back and say, is this even what I want to be doing with my life? Because I had a sense that it wasn't, but I didn't want to admit that. And I almost felt like I needed to keep going because maybe at some point it's going to work. And that does happen, right? There are like, we can work through things that maybe are those underlying things that make us unhappy. And we can see, is this so true? Like, I don't want to be doing this or not. But this is just part of that idea of like, sometimes you're just stepping back and saying like, yes, that might be the next logical decision on my career journey, but do I even want to be on that path, right? Maybe I want to be on a different path, and we get to decide that. Okay, so these are some reasons why we might resist setting goals. We're going to talk a little bit further in the day 2 part of it on specific resistance to your specific goal. But these are more kind of general reasons why you might resist setting goals at all, or kind of like, why bother, or like, I don't want to do that. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about these. So the first one is, why do it if I'm just risking failure? I'm just risking feeling worse about myself, having even worse confidence if I fail. And the one part of this is that we actually want to set goals completely differently. Our general model that we see goals through is what they call the resolution model of change, which is I build up a bunch of motivation, I psych myself up, I make myself want to do this thing. Then I use willpower to actually do the thing. And when that stops working, which it inevitably does, I feel shame. And then because I feel shame and I'm like, come on, I need to be doing this, I build up my motivation again, use my willpower. And when that fails, shame. So you kind of see this cycle going around. So we can actually set goals completely differently. That is not a science-based, an evidence-based way of setting a goal. So maybe it's just the way that you set goals, but also I think it's important to understand that we are changing our relationship to failure through pursuing and setting goals, setting and pursuing goals. We actually want to use it as an opportunity, kind of like the idea of becoming. We want to use it as an opportunity to change our relationship with failure, for it not to mean something about us, for us not to treat ourselves badly when we fail, for it not to ruin our relationship with ourselves, to actually have experiencing failure be something that builds our self-trust, that builds our resilience, and that builds our enthusiasm for what we're doing. One of the ideas that I love, this is the book that I referenced in the beginning, The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. He talks about how we have infinite games and finite games. So finite games might be, he talks about sport, for example, where there's a definite winning and losing. And it makes sense to think about succeeding and failing in those environments. But when we think about something like life, you don't win at life. You don't win at relationships. You don't win at health. You don't win at your career, right? So in those kinds of infinite games, success and failure become less relevant. We might fail at a finite thing that we've set, right? Like you might fail at this particular goal that you've set, but it doesn't make you fail as a person. It doesn't make you fail at life. It doesn't make you fail at your career. So when you can see it in that infinite way, you can start to see, the way that I kind of see it is, this is my life's work. What I'm doing is my life's work. So it becomes completely irrelevant to me if I fail along the way. In fact, I know that I'm just going to learn and grow from that. And I know I'll become a better coach from all my failures. And so it can be a way to improve that relationship with myself if I look at the infinite game, which is also that similar idea of like, it's about who I'm becoming. So whether I fail along the way, it's like, irrelevant. In fact, I want to fail because I want a better relationship with failure. I want to reframe failure for myself. The second one is that we might resist setting a goal because it's going to require things to suck. It's going to require rules and restrictions and sacrifices that I don't want to make. And again, we want to look at maybe it's just the way that you set goals, right? One of the things we'll talk about a little bit later is approach versus avoidance goals. But sometimes we literally define our goals by what we don't want. I want to stop procrastinating. I want to stop going to bed so late. I want to not feel anxious. So we define it in the terms of this is what I don't want instead of this is what I do want. This is what I want to move towards. If you don't want to spend so much time scrolling on social media, what do you want to spend your time doing? What is going to be nourishing time for you? So we're looking at what we do want versus don't. So that's often something to look at when you think that there's going to be all these sacrifices and stuff. And then also we can reframe restriction in a new way. So sometimes we are, I used this example yesterday of scheduling everything in. So I like to schedule in my calendar. There's something that I've gotten better at. But now I kind of schedule everything in. Every part of my calendar is decided in advance. And someone might look at that and say, that feels really restrictive to me. Like, I don't want to have everything decided in advance. But in reality, it gives me so much freedom because when I have 2 hours that are free on my calendar, I know that those are genuinely free hours, right? I'm not worrying about, should I be doing more? Should I be working on this thing? Should I have maybe thought about this thing more? Should I be going to the gym? I'm not worrying about that. So I get to completely mentally relax, emotionally replenish. I get to take a nap or read or whatever it is. Go outside and walk. It doesn't matter. So it gives me freedom from something that looks like it would be restrictive. So sometimes we're reframing restriction as freedom in a different kind of way, or sometimes freedom in the long term, even if it's restrictive in the short term. And then the third part of that is sometimes we are just deciding on, or we're differentiating maybe between what is just, I just don't want to feel uncomfortable. And then that's part of what we are doing in this journey, right? We are learning how to manage discomfort, learning how to navigate urges to do something when that's not in alignment with what our goal is, right? So we are learning how to navigate discomfort and regulate our emotions. But sometimes there are genuine non-negotiable things, right? Like sometimes we say, yes, I want to earn more money in my practice, but I don't want to work more hours, right? Or yes, I want to become a well-known expert in this particular field within my bigger professional field, but I don't want that to come at a cost to my relationship if I have to travel, for example, right? So we might have certain things that we are not willing to sacrifice, and we can kind of bake that into our goals. Like, I want to have this without sacrificing this, but then they're truly non-negotiables. And then the third one is thinking about, I'm just not the kind of person who ... So sometimes this is about the outcome, right? Sometimes we think about the goal itself, like let's say it's a financial goal and we say, I don't really care that much about money, or it's based on achievement or being known for something, and say, well, I don't really care about achievement or fame. Or you think, I'm just someone who's like really happy and grateful for where I am. I don't need to strive for something else, right? And I just want to remind you that your goal needs to be meaningful to you. So it's not about money or achievement or fame or whatever, if that's not what you want, right? And the research shows that we actually are less likely to achieve goals when they are externally driven, or when we think of it as like societal stuff that we maybe should want, or maybe other people would be more accepted or something like that. When it's very intrinsically motivated, we are much more likely to achieve it. So it can be about what is important to you, not about what you think you should be pursuing or what other people are pursuing. And then also sometimes it's about, I was just thinking now, also sometimes it's about what you make it mean, right? Like if you say, oh, I'm just really grateful for where I am, we can be grateful for where we are and we can be going for change. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, right? So sometimes it's our meaning making around pursuing that we can look at. And then sometimes we're thinking, oh, I'm just not the kind of person who ... And we're thinking more about the process. Like, I'm not the kind of person who follows through on their goals, right? Or I've just never done this before. Like, I've never been that kind of person. I've never been the kind of person who's disciplined, or I've never been the kind of person who is able to say no to patients, right? If we're wanting like more work-life balance and we're wanting to not say yes to every patient who wants to book, even if it's a time that we said we're not practicing. Like, I'm just not the kind of person who can say no or disappoint people or something like that, right? And again, it's what you're making that mean. Like, do you think that means you're selfish? We'll talk about a little bit more about that today. Like, are you making some sort of character judgment about that? But also, if it is something important to you, you are looking at this goal as like, this is who I'm becoming, right? So if you are not self-disciplined to start off with, you are becoming someone on the process of pursuing this goal who is self-disciplined. So it makes sense that you're not that person already. That's literally the whole point of this process, right? So you don't have to disqualify yourself just because you're not that person already. This can be the stage on which you practice those things. Okay. And then not wanting to focus on only one thing. So sometimes we want to set a goal in multiple areas. We want a health goal, we want a career goal, we want a relationship goal, and we kind of pursue all those things. But in reality, in our life, our resources don't compartmentalize. We have the same energy, we have the same money, we have the same time. They have to be split up over these things. And there's this concept in essentialism where he draws a circle and he draws one line going out of that circle versus having like all these little lines coming out of the circle. So you can make progress, significant progress in one direction, or you can make a little bit of progress in multiple directions, right? It's the same thing as that idea of you can do anything, you just can't do everything. So we have to sometimes, this is part of like who we are becoming, right? It requires us to prioritize, to think, what is really important to me? What am I willing to put my time and resources into? And those things will have ripple effects as well, right? Like working on one area will affect other areas. And you're also not completely just ignoring other areas of your life, right? It doesn't mean everything kind of like goes up in flames because you are focusing on this thing. It's just your priority. So it's the thing that you filter through. This is the thing that comes first and other things come later. But it doesn't mean that everything just falls to the wayside. And then the last one that I just wanted to touch on is I might be changing my situation anyway. So like, what is the point in going for this thing if I'm actually maybe like going to change something anyway? So we end up kind of being in a little bit of limbo. So as I often tell my clients, when they are wanting to work on something, it is worth working on that thing anyway. It's worth being happier where you are in this current job, in this current career anyway, even if you think you might change later on. Firstly, because sometimes you realize through feeling better that actually I have much more control over things than I maybe thought I did. And I actually can feel completely different without changing anything external to me. That's often part of the skills that we are learning. But also because it's about who you are becoming again, right? We're learning those skills, we're learning those processes, we're understanding our own brains, and we're going to take that with us wherever we go, to whatever job, to whatever career, to whatever country. And so it's worth working on anyway. You might have a flavor of these, you might have something that's different to these. These are just some of the main ones that I hear. You're welcome to email me with any of yours if you'd like to, if you're like, oh, I'm not sold on this goal setting thing. I don't really want to set goals. And I will say there have been years that I didn't set goals. And sometimes I have a year of really going for something, going big on something. And the next year I'm just like, I just want a year where I'm kind of like open to everything. And I'm not necessarily picking a particular focus and I want to have that flexibility. So it's totally fine. It's just about this idea of loving your reasons why. So like, it's totally fine if you don't want to set a goal. But let's not do it. Let's not set a goal because you're scared of failure, for example, or sacrificing something or being uncomfortable, right? Like we want to love the reasons why we do something. Okay. So this is where we did a little bit of brainstorming. So I will not leave the time for the brainstorming as we did yesterday. I will just tell you how many minutes you can set a timer for, you can do this for, and you can pause this recording and just brainstorm that. I really recommend doing these brainstorming exercises because they kind of build on each other, and the day two stuff builds on what we're doing now. So I would take the time, do these exercises. They really are so helpful as well to illuminate things for you, to become clearer on things for you. And that helps with the whole process. So the first one is we're just getting some sense of like, what is important? So we're going to spend 2 minutes and I want you to describe an average day in your ideal life. So ideal life because it's everything that you've ever wanted. You don't necessarily have to know the specifics of what that is, but just imagine what it feels like to just be in your ideal life. But it's an average day, right? It's not the day that you receive the accolade, the day that you walk across the stage at your graduation for this new degree that you're pursuing. It's not the day that you receive a promotion. It's not the day that you have this patient who just like gushes about how grateful they are and brings you presents and all of that, right? It's just an average work day. Maybe that is your average work day. I don't know. But this is an idea from the minimalists called Solving for Wednesday. And the idea is we just want to know what an average day looks like for us. When we think of goals and when we think of our lives as being ideal, we often think of the big things, the degrees, the jobs, the accolades, etc. But I want you to think of the average day. Like, what do you want your life to just feel like? What do you want your average day to feel like? What do you want it to look like? What kind of things are you doing in your average day, but in your ideal life? So you can pause and write for 2 minutes about that. The second one here is again, pausing for 2 minutes and writing about the future world you envision. So you can use the prompt, I envision a world where ... And write for 2 minutes on anything that comes up. It doesn't mean that you have to create this world. You can contribute to this world. You can just have some involvement in this world, or it's just what you envision. So this is like bigger than you, bigger than your lifetime, bigger than 3 lifetimes. So don't worry about being, what do you call it? Realistic. Don't worry about being realistic about this. I want you to dream a little bit about the future world that you imagine. And you can pause now again for 2 minutes and write about that. Okay, and then from those 2 exercises, think about 3 descriptives or adjectives of a person who would contribute to or embody those 2 things. So they would be someone who created that day that you talked about, or they would be contributing to that world that you are dreaming of, right? Envisioning. Like 3 descriptions of a word. One thing you can also do here is if you already know what your goal is, you can think about who is the kind of person who has already done that, already achieved that thing. And you can either just keep those 3 words to play with all of them, or you can just highlight one or underline one that feels like the strongest one for you, or the one that you really want to develop. And I just gave some more suggestions here, which you can develop this idea of like who you are becoming. One is to really vividly imagine a scene. I do this with my clients. It's called the future you visualization, where you visualize a scene where you are actually meeting a future version of yourself. And this can be 1 year down the line. It can be 5 years, 10 years, 40 years. But you imagine and you really take the time to actually envision the scene playing out and notice what you notice about how they look, maybe how they dress, maybe how they carry themselves, how they talk to other people, what advice they have for you, how they talk about the things that they've done in their life, what encouragement do they have, what wisdom do they have to share with you. It's a really cool thing to do. Another thing you can do is write a letter to you from a year from now. So, or from a year from now. So you can do this both ways. Actually, the best results that they found is when people do both. So you can write a letter to yourself a year from now, and just talking about these are all the things I did. This is what I envisioned in the year this year. This is what I'm planning to do, and then you open that in a year's time. But you can also write a letter from the future you, the one who has already achieved this thing, who's already done the things, who's already created this ideal world that you want to create, or this ideal life. And they're writing to you and telling you what you need to know about what is coming up in the next year. Both are really cool exercises to do. And then one of the other things you can use just as kind of supplemental information is you could go to a website called viacharacter.org, so viacharacter.org. And that is the VIA Strengths Assessment. You can also just Google VIA Strengths Assessment, and it's a free assessment, and you can just use it to see what are your main character strengths. And then you can think about how do I use maybe my top one or two character strengths in either deciding on what my goal is or deciding like who is the person that I'm really wanting to embody. Okay. So from that brainstorm, we're going to be taking that, and through various filters, we're going to decide on a goal. So the first thing we're going to just, for a minute, you can stop this again, and you're going to brainstorm a whole bunch of goals and outcomes that you want, like things you want to achieve, goals you want to have, future outcomes that you want to create. And don't filter in this step. You're just letting your brain run free. Don't think about what is realistic. Don't think about what you're not scared about. You can even use the prompt, if I had no fear, this is what I would do. And you can just write for that. So you can pause for 1 minute and write as many as you like. And then you want to look at those that you've brainstormed, those different outcomes and goals or ideas for goals, and filter it through your brainstorm of the ideal day the average day in your ideal life and the world that you envision contributing to, and that the like characteristics of who you are becoming that you did in the previous slide. Filter through all of those and just see, is there one that stands out that would help you embody those things? Is there one that feels like those two things are kind of aligning with each other? And again, you're not worrying about whether it's realistic, whether you're scared or not. You can still use the filter of, if I had no fear, which one would I be picking? Like if I had the guts to do this thing, which one would I pick? If I really was like, I am willing to like be uncomfortable, which one would I go for? And then there might be some other things here that we are filtering for. So the first one is the type of goal. They are what we call learning goals and performance goals. Learning goals are things that we've never done before. So we are learning how to do the thing. Performance goals are, we've done it before in some capacity, and now we're just doing that bigger, better, faster. And this is really important when we understand what goal we're trying to create. This is something that I see often when someone is setting up their own practice, and this is definitely true for me. We go from usually straight from varsity, but either way, we go into practice having zero business knowledge or experience, and we just go into it and we just have these like goals and deadlines for, I need to be having this many patients in my practice by this time, otherwise, I'm not going to make rent, so I have to close my practice. So we have these kind of very what actually is more appropriate for performance goals, which is the deadlines, the numbers, the very rigid thing. But those are appropriate for performance because we've done the thing in the past and we know how to replicate that or how to scale that. There might still be some learning involved in your performance goal because you're taking it to the next level. But learning goals are where the majority of what you're going to be doing is stuff that you've never done before. So there's going to be a lot of learning in that. So you might just make a note on this is a learning goal or this is a performance goal. And just see, like, it might not be like super clear for you, but just think about what is it leaning towards? Is it more like learning? It's more like the majority of this is something I've never done before, or is it majority something I have done before and I'm just trying to do bigger, better, faster, etc. And then the other type of goal that you want to think about is what we talked about earlier, which is approach versus avoid. We want to frame our goal. We want to state our goal as an approach goal. This is what I want to move towards. This is what I want to create. I want to achieve this thing versus this is what I don't want. This is what I want to stop doing. So just, yeah, it's just the way that you phrase the goal. And then the next one that you might filter through is the level of challenge. So you just want to pick a goal that is, I think one of the terms is like nerve-sided. You're nervous about it, but you're excited. Like it has that little like, this is going to take some growth, this is going to take some discomfort, but it's not so big that it's completely paralyzing, or it's just so big that you almost like your brain just can't even wrap your head around it, right? And if it is big and overwhelming, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to dismiss that goal. It might just be that you break it down just slightly into like a little bit more of a smaller chunk and say, maybe I can go for this part of this goal first. That doesn't feel so overwhelming and like paralyzing. And then objectivity and standards and measurements. So we want to essentially take our goal and then make something very objective. You can think about, how will I know whether I achieve this or not? And we can use a measurement, right? Like, for example, if you're saying, I want to grow my practice, right? That's quite vague. We don't know whether or not you succeeded, right? If you didn't measure it, you don't know what it meant to grow, like what counts as growth, right? And often we will discount things if we don't have a very clear thing of this is success and this is failure. And again, we are not avoiding knowing that we failed because we're learning a new relationship and how to treat ourselves when we fail. So we're not avoiding that. And we just want some number that gives us some sense, right? It doesn't mean that the number is the biggest thing, right? So if you're saying, I want to grow my practice, you might use a financial indicator of what your income was in that month or that year or whatever on average. It doesn't mean that the money is all you care about, right? Just because you pick something that is measurable and objective and gives you a clear idea of whether you achieve that or not, doesn't mean that that's the thing you care most about. It's just having some idea of that. So pick something that will tell you whether or not you achieve this thing, instead of keeping it kind of vague. And then decide on your non-negotiables. So what is it for you that you are not willing to sacrifice? What is really important in terms of like your values, right? Again, maybe let's use the example of, I want to grow my practice, but I don't want to work more hours. Like I'm not willing to work more hours than I already am, right? Or I'm not willing to sacrifice my health. I'm not willing to sacrifice my family time, etc. You can decide on what your non-negotiables are. So you can phrase your goal in that way. I want to achieve this without ... working more hours, sacrificing my health, sacrificing my sleep, my relationships, etc. Okay. Okay. So then we are looking at brainstorming what is going to be required, what is going to be involved in actually pursuing this goal. And again, we're going to get to the resistance of this later, so don't filter that necessarily now. And with this, you want to get as specific as you can. So for 2 minutes, you're going to write down all the actions and behaviors that you think will be required. And remember, this is just your theory, especially if it's a learning goal. This is just your theory on what it's going to take, right? You're going to have to measure this along the way and see is this what I needed? Did I have to do more? Did I have to do less? Did I have to do something completely different? This is your theory. Okay, so you can pause this, write for 2 minutes, and try and be as specific as you can on the actions and behaviors that it will require to achieve this goal. Once you've got those actions and behaviors, you're going to look at what is the emotional fuel that I need in order to do those actions. Sometimes, yes, we just do it anyway, even if we don't feel like it, even if we're not in the mood to do that thing, right? But as much as possible, we want the emotional fuel that drives that. When you see people who look very self-disciplined and you think that they just do things even when they don't want to do things, that's partly true. But what they found is people who are very self-disciplined have very high levels of intrinsic motivation, meaning they genuinely want to do the thing, right? So they're not out there running and at every step of the way being like, oh, forcing myself to do this and willpowering through. You genuinely want to go for a run. I know sometimes we look at what people do and we're like, they definitely don't actually want to do that thing. But I promise you, that is one of the biggest traits of people who are self-disciplined is they have very high levels of intrinsic motivation. So it's just something to think about. So you want that emotional fuel, you want that desire, you want that that intrinsic motivation to do those behaviors. So you can also think about this as how do you want to feel along the way? I talked yesterday about this concept of almost imagining that your emotions will bleed into or seep into the things that you are doing. So you don't want to be treating patients and growing your practice, but the whole time feeling resentful and burnt out and emotionally disconnected. So how do you want to feel along the way? I just said yesterday as well, don't use that against yourself of oh my gosh, I can't even have a bad day because all my emotions are going to be seeping into my patients, right? It's not actually like that. It's just to use that thought experiment to think about how do I actually want to feel along the way of pursuing this goal? Because that's going to be the majority of your time. The outcome is going to be this tiny little sliver of your life. But pursuing this goal is going to be a daily thing. It's going to be a huge portion of your life. So you want to feel the way that you want to feel along the way as well. And that doesn't just mean always feeling good, right? It just means that you are fueling with the emotions that you need to actually do the things that you want to do. So you can also pause and just jot down some emotions. And just a note on this, sometimes we say things like, I want to feel like I'm good at what I do, right? That is a thought, it's not an emotion. So when you think of an emotion, think of I feel, and there's no like or I feel that. It's I feel energized or excited or calm or neutral or dedicated. Anything that feels like one word and that isn't like a sentence that starts with I feel that or I feel like. Just a note on those are not actually emotions. Those are thoughts. Okay. So now we are kind of reverse engineering, right? Because the actions are sort of fueled by how we're feeling. When we are fueled in a certain way emotionally, we take certain actions. And then reverse engineering that, there are certain thoughts and beliefs that will create those emotions. You can brainstorm this now, like any thoughts and beliefs. I gave a few examples yesterday, like I can help them. This is my life's work. I'm willing to try. I'm willing to fail. I'm willing to get better at this. I am getting better at this, right? Like anything that's going to help you create the emotions that you jotted down. What thoughts or what beliefs maybe about yourself, about your work, about your patients, what do you need to be thinking and believing in order to produce that emotional fuel? And I would really recommend picking thoughts and beliefs that you already believe are true. So you're not trying to create a mantra or some sort of affirmation that is like, I'm the most amazing ever, and like patients never annoy me, and they're just like fantastic. And anything that feels like you're trying to convince yourself, that's not going to produce the emotion that you're looking for. So you want something that feels true, that resonates in your body, even if it's not your default way of thinking, but it feels true to you. Like, okay, I can access that. Like when I'm doing something hard, I don't think, oh, this is going to go amazingly. Everything's going to go perfect. You're not going to forget a single word. You're not going to, do anything wrong. I just think I'm willing to learn from this. I'm willing to experience failure. I'm willing to try, right? Sometimes it's just something as neutral as I'm here. This is what I'm doing right now. Like when you are doing a certain activity, like this is just what I'm doing right now. It can sometimes be very like just stating the facts, being very neutral about it. And sometimes it helps, we were talking about this yesterday as well, like orientating towards service. Like sometimes it helps to fuel you when you think about the people that you are serving, the people that you are helping, the people that you're doing this for. And then, so you can pause and brainstorm any thoughts and beliefs. And then the next one is learning. So brainstorming anything that you feel you might need to learn. What do you already know? What are some people you can talk to? What are some books that you might want to read? We'll talk about this a little bit in the second one as well. But we're not procrastinating or procrastinating. We are trying to flatten the learning curve as quickly as possible. And sorry, just a note on this. I mentioned this yesterday, but when we are setting a learning goal, it doesn't mean we don't set like a deadline or we don't set specific numbers for it. It's just that we are aware that that is just a theory of like, I'm making this random number, but like, I have no idea because I've never done this thing before. So a little bit more kind of loose, and you're aware that this is just a theory, but you can still use the numbers to have some sort of gauge of whether or not you are reaching that thing, right? It gives you some feedback. Okay, so you can brainstorm a little bit of everything you might need to learn in order to do this. And then the last one is feedback and check-in. What kind of feedback, what cadence of feedback or checking in or accountability do you need? We're going to talk more now about external accountability or other support from other people. But here, just thinking of when are you going to check in? When are you going to check your bank balance if it's a financial goal? When are you going to check your patient numbers if it's a patient number goal? When are you going to check in with how many times you went to bed at a certain time to see how that is going? Like, when are you going to check in? When are you going to give yourself feedback? And I think about it as like, we want to do this period relatively short. So maybe it's a month, maybe it's every 2 weeks. Depending on how long this takes you, it can be like a weekly thing. You can do like a shorter feedback on weekly or bi-weekly, and then a bigger check-in in like month or quarterly. But you don't want to, like, let's say your goal is for a whole year. You don't want to only check in at the end of the year and only know at the end of the year that you're actually not on track, right? You want to know along the way so that you are, again, flattening that learning curve. You're saying, like, okay, what do I need to adapt? What do I need to change? What do I need to do differently? What is working? What can I do more of that is already working? But you want some cadence of checking in that is not going to wait for the whole year or the whole time that your goal is in order to know whether you're on the right track or not. Okay. And then obviously we're going to carry on now, but this was just saying see you tomorrow and what to expect. So we'll be talking about that now, so I won't go into that. Okay, cool. So you can keep your notes that you made now for this day too. Of course, you can obviously take a break and do this tomorrow or another day. I'm just going to go ahead because I'm recording all of this. Okay, cool. So we're going to be talking about resistance, internal and external. We're talking about resources and relationships. And we're going to start. This is something that if you were at my Growth Edge workshop, you will know all about the psychological immune system, or if you're one of my clients. But essentially, we have what is known as the psychological immune system, which can be seen as like a clash between these two things. You have a conscious commitment to grow, to change, to achieve the things that you want to achieve. And you have an unconscious commitment to protect yourself. And these two things are always battling it out. It's kind of like the normal immune system, right? We have the immune system fighting off threats or perceived threats. And we know that in situations like when someone needs a heart transplant, we actually need to take immunosuppressants because the body will reject anything that's foreign, even if it's something we desperately need, right? That person desperately needs the heart transplant, but their body will reject it because it perceives it as a threat, as foreign. And it's a similar thing with our immune system. It will reject anything that it perceives as new or foreign or as a threat. And sometimes I like to think of this in relation to like autoimmune conditions, right? When we have an overactive immune system, we can have the same idea in our psychological immune system, where we are overprotecting against things that are maybe not as threatening as we think. But this is essentially this battle is why we have things like what we see as self-sabotage, right? I wanted to do this thing, but I keep doing something else. As having one foot on the brake and one foot on the accelerator. Like I'm going for this change, but also I'm like resisting this change. And it's often why we think like, am I crazy? Like I know what to do, I'm just not doing it. You might think that you're lazy because again, same thing. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I know what I should be doing. I know it's going to be helpful for me, but I just can't get myself to do it. And we might think we're unmotivated. So this is happening for our patients too, right? When they do things that frustrate us, when they do things that are against what is best for their health or their recovery, this is also one of the things that can be getting in the way. There's a study, the psychological immune system is a concept by researchers Robert Keegan and Lisa Lahey. And they had a study that there were multiple ones. Some of them were more lifestyle related, some of them were medication. But essentially, they looked at patients who I think they'd had by that time like a mild coronary event. And they were told by their doctors that if you don't make these changes, these lifestyle changes, I think there were 3 lifestyle changes that they had to make. If you don't make these changes, you are literally going to die. And 1 in 7 of those patients managed to make all of those lifestyle changes. 1 in 7. And this is where the stakes are really high. They are really motivated to change. There were also ones about medication where the doctor in a similar thing would say, this is like life-saving medication. You need to be taking this every single day. And when they asked the patients straight after the doctor appointment, like, do you plan to take your medication? This is what the researchers asked. They would be like, what do you mean? Like the doctor just told me I'm going to die. Of course I'm going to take my medication. Like, what are you asking me? But then on follow-up, they were really struggling to actually do that. So even as something as simple as taking a medication has way more to it than we think of, like, if I just know what to do, I will do it. Right? So just think about it. This is true for your patients as well. And it's so important for us to know this for ourselves and for our patients. So these are the types of threats that your brain perceives. The first one is what they call status or identity. So this doesn't necessarily mean your hierarchical status in society, although that could be one of them, but it's also like how you identify as a person. This can look like, I don't want to be seen as someone who's selfish. I don't want to be seen as someone who doesn't care, right? Like, let's say, for example, you, like that example of earlier of you want to start going home at a certain time. So you've decided I'm no longer going to book patients after 5 p.m., for example. But then a patient phones and you end up booking them, right? But what part of what might have been going on there is that you did not want to be seen as a selfish person or someone who doesn't care about their patients. And so when your patient needs you, you're there, right? So it can be things like that. It can be certainty. So this acronym is SCARF, SCARF. So it's status and identity. C is for certainty. So if something threatens your certainty, this is when we'd rather have the unhappiness and the discomfort and the unfulfilling and boring thing we already have, rather than go after something that we really want, because that comes with a certain level of uncertainty. We don't know if it's going to be successful. We don't know what it's going to feel like, right? We don't know if we can do it. We don't know if we're going to succeed. And so we rather stay where we are. We rather have the familiar than the uncertainty. The third is autonomy. We protect ourselves against a perceived threat to our autonomy when we feel like someone else is making decisions for us, when we feel like someone else is controlling our time, controlling our behavior, determining what we can and cannot do. We will have that threat to our autonomy. The fourth is relatedness. So our relationship to other people. If we perceive that something is going to harm our relationship or be a threat to our relationship, we might not do it, even though we know they would be helpful. For example, if you are highly introverted or you just feel very overstimulated when you come back from work, and what you really need is just an hour to like decompress, to be alone with your own thoughts, to just like not have to think about anything. And you want to have that conversation with your partner to tell them, because they just want to like talk to you about their day, or they want to hear about your day, and they want to have this whole conversation when you get home from work. And what you really want, what you know would be helpful, is to say, like, listen, can I just have please like 1 hour when I get home? I just want to have my own time, because you might see that as it's going to threaten our relationship. I'm going to harm our relationship in some way. And the last one is fairness. We might perceive, like, let's say, for example, this might be another like relationship one. But let's say, for example, you are always the one working on things in a relationship. Like you are always the one getting coaching or getting therapy or working on the way that you handle situations or doing things more maturely. And your partner never does those things. And so you know that it would be helpful for you to learn those skills, to learn how to manage your emotions, to be more mature psychologically, but you perceive it as unfair that you always have to be the person being like the bigger person, right? Or the more mature person. And so you might see that as a threat and not actually want to do it. Okay. So just one of those things, like for example, the patients, one of the things that they saw in those studies is like when a patient had to do something that was for their health, like take a medication or change something, one of the status or identity threats was like, I don't want to feel like I'm old, or I don't want to feel like I'm that sick person who needs to be taken care of, right? And then it can be, like, for example, the autonomy thing, right? Like, I don't want to feel like my life is being controlled. Like, I want to feel like I can do what I want to do, and not that my behavior is being dictated by these rules and these prescriptions by the doctor and all that kind of stuff. So just thinking of, you can also start to filter for this in your patient interactions as well. By the way, you don't know what someone's like unconscious immune or their psychological immune system is doing. There are ways that you can elicit that, but there's no like, if they say this, that's what like if they don't want to do something, it automatically means XYZ. It will be different for every person. It might look the same on the outside, but it might be different on the inside. Okay. So in the context of the goal, why this is important is we might have all these logical reasons why this goal is the most amazing thing ever and why it makes total sense, and like why, we've mapped out all the actions that we need to take, and we're like, oh, this doesn't seem too bad. Like, I can do this. But then unconsciously, we are dreading something, or we are fearful of something, or we are having emotional responses. And so we have hidden motives, or commitments. So what you can do is pause and brainstorm for 2 minutes. If you look at your list of, these are the actions that I need to take, and this is why we also want to flesh that out as much as possible, have it be super specific so that you can imagine yourself doing that. Like, let's say you're starting a new venture and you have to start like posting about it on social media, and you're like, oh. Right? Like me, when I started posting about my coaching, I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to feel so uncomfortable. So what are you fearing? What are you dreading? What do you imagine happening if I had to say, you have to do those things tomorrow, right? You're going to do all these things. What fear comes up? Like, I'm scared of this. I'm dreading that this is going to happen. anything that comes up in terms of discomfort or like fear or like, ugh. I sometimes think about it, that like visceral feeling of like, oh my gosh, no. Write about that for 2 minutes. You can pause this and just list as much as you can. And then from those dreads, you're going to identify what the competing commitment is. So when we talked about the psychological immune system, we talked about you have this conscious commitment to grow, and then you have unconscious commitments to protect yourself. So those are competing with each other, those commitments. So this is how it might sound. Like, let's say one of your dreads is, I'll use that example again. Like, I'm going to start posting on social media. And what I'm dreading is that like someone's going to be looking at it and be like, oh my gosh, what is she doing? Right. Someone is going to judge me, right? That maybe is like my ick. My competing commitment then, like I have this commitment to achieving my goal and to doing that thing and to posting on social media. And also my competing commitment is to never feel like someone is going to reject me, never risking that someone is going to judge me or reject me. And that's going to be competing against that. Like, no, I'm committed to no one ever judging me or rejecting me or thinking like, what the hell is she doing, right? So you can basically take your dreads or your fears and turn them into, what is that commitment that is competing against that? And it's often protective. What are you protecting yourself against? Maybe let me think of one more example. Like in that example of, I don't want to turn a patient away because I don't want them to see it as I don't care or I'm selfish. Your competing commitment is, I do not want to be seen as selfish and I do not want to be seen as someone who doesn't care. So that is what you're going to be fighting for. I refuse to risk someone seeing me as selfish. No, I'm just not going to do it. That's going to be clashing up against your very sincere commitment to go home at a reasonable time. If you want to flesh this out a little bit more, you can pop over to my Instagram page at cliniciancoach_Sarah, or just pop me an email if you want access to this. But in the link in my bio, one of the things is a free training called Mapping Change. And there you put in your goal, and then you map out all of these things, your competing commitments, your underlying dreads, and then you take that and you put that into what are your underlying assumptions. So if you want to kind of flesh that out a little bit more or know a little bit more about that or kind of take this through that, you're welcome to do that. But that's kind of if you want to dive a little bit deeper into this part of it. And then the last step is, from your competing commitments, you're going to identify your underlying assumptions. So in those two examples again, right? When I have the thought of, I need to post on social media, but I also have these commitments to not having someone judge me or reject me, that is the competing commitment, right? The underlying assumption is, if I post on social media, someone is going to reject me, or people are going to reject me, or people are going to judge me. That is my assumption that I'm making. I don't know that. That is the threat that my brain is perceiving, like, no, don't do that. That's what's going to happen. But that's an assumption, right? I don't know that that's true. Or I don't know to what extent that is true. And then the other example of, I don't want to say no to a patient, right? Because I don't want them to perceive me as selfish or not caring. So that is the competing commitment. I'm committed to not being seen as someone who is selfish or doesn't care. What is the underlying assumption there, right? If I say no to a patient, if I turn them away, they're going to think I'm selfish and that I don't care, or that I don't care, right? Whichever one you're working with at that time. What is also underlying, sometimes we find like deeper assumptions underlying our other assumptions, which is like in the first example, I can't handle it if someone judges or rejects me. That's also an assumption, right? I'm having these alarm bells about someone rejecting me or judging me, but maybe I'll actually be okay with it. Firstly, because I don't know. But maybe it's actually not as difficult as it may seem, right? Or maybe in this case with the patient, if someone judges you as being uncaring, one of the reasons that you're resisting that is that you think you can't handle if someone thinks those things of you, right? So there's sometimes layers to that. That's why the mapping change will help with that. But if you just want to write down like one or two, and then the reason that we do this whole process is because once we get to our assumptions, we can design little experiments that help us test out our assumption. And this will get clearer in the next slide. But if you take that assumption, for example, like if I say no to a patient when they want to book after 5 p.m., even though that's my now official closing time, they're going to think I'm selfish or that I don't care. How can we test that out in a very small way? These little experiments are always progressive. We want to essentially, in very small ways, in very small steps, show our unconscious mind that it is safer than it thinks it is, because it's perceiving this huge threat. It's like, nope, we're not doing that, right? So you want to almost design little experiments that are going to test out that assumption. Like, is it really true that that's what patients think? Or do they just think, oh, that's clearly her opening times, right? Like a normal business. So you can design from your assumptions, you can design little experiments. I like to think of it as like, we're not trying to jump off a cliff, right? We're not trying to like go straight to the next patient that phones, I'm just going to say no. We might design a little experiment where we're like, instead of jumping off that cliff into the water when we're so scared, we jump off like a little rock first, and then a little bigger rock, a little bit of a bigger rock, and then until we get more comfortable with it. So it might be like, in this example, one of the small experiments can just be like, you say no to that time, but if they really like, oh, I really can't come, or, you know, if they push you a little bit, then you book it. So you almost like, you're just creating like a little bit of a barrier and testing that out, but you're making it small enough that you feel comfortable to do that. Okay, awesome. So this is an analogy by psychologist Jonathan Haidt. And this is a way to almost like think about an analogy of your psychological immune system. So your rational, reasoning brain that problem solves and makes future plans and plans this amazing goal of yours and thinks about everything you need to do, that is that little rider on top of that huge elephant. The rider is the person that can essentially like see the path ahead. It can see where we're going, right? And it can plan for that, and it can, you know, reason it out. The elephant is your more like instinctual being, your instincts, your visceral reactions, your habits, especially when you are emotionally activated, or like we're talking about with the psychological immune system, when it perceives some kind of threat. And you can imagine when the elephant is activated and it has a particular path that it wants to go on, it does not matter what your rider is doing. It could not care less. Your rider is small and has zero weight advantage in this equation. So when the rider and the elephant disagree on where we should be going, the elephant is always going to win. So one is not better than the other. We're not trying to have only the rider or only the elephant. These are just the two characters we have in our brain. And psychological development, psychological maturity is knowing how to handle this, how to navigate the tension between these two things and actually help them work together rather than one trying to dominate the other. So we're not trying to get rid of one, and we're not trying to go to the extreme of one or the other. We're not one or the other. We're not trying to only plan, only reason, only think through things, and then be surprised when we get to that day and don't actually feel like doing the thing. Or a threat gets activated and we end up booking the patient, even though our very reasonable, rational brain said it would be very helpful if we go to bed, that too, but go home at a specific time. If our elephant feels activated or triggered, something that it perceives as a threat, it's going to do whatever it wants. So we're not trying to, essentially go to one extreme. So we're not allowing ourselves to just we're like, oh, well, the elephant has a weight advantage. It's going to go where it wants to go. So, you know, whatever. I'm just going to wing it. I'm just going to like let myself do whatever I want, whenever I want. If I feel like eating this, I'll eat this. If I feel like working out, I will. If I don't, I won't. If I feel like booking the patient at that time, I will. If I don't, I won't. Like almost like you just have to kind of like be at the mercy of whatever you want instinctually, emotionally, etc. This is also very driven by the unconscious assumptions we were talking about in the psychological immune system. So we also don't go to the other extreme where we're trying to dominate with the rider, right? We're trying to use our conscious processes and like force ourselves to do things. Like, I don't care if you don't feel like doing this thing. You're going to do this thing. Remember, your elephant is going to win if you try and do that, right? What often happens is our elephant does whatever the elephant wants to do. Our emotional brain does whatever it wants to do. And then the rider is essentially like what one of my coaches, Dr. Sasha Hines, calls like the PR agent. It like spins a story. It like wants to pretend that it's still in control. So it's like, it'll justify the behavior that you kind of did instinctually, right? Like she uses the example of when we needed to study for exams, and you just like emotionally, you're just like, oh no, I'm going to bed right now. And then you justify it. You're like, tomorrow I'll feel so much more rested. This is actually a very good choice. So it can sometimes like reason and justify what is subconsciously happening anyway. And so we almost like, again, we're trying to see how we can work with these two things rather than trying to have one always dominating or the other. But the cool thing is like when the elephant is going in the direction that you actually want it to go, it is unstoppable. When the elephant actually wants to go towards where your goals are, where you're wanting to make a change, where you're wanting things to be different, it can be unstoppable. It can be an asset rather than a liability. It becomes a liability when the two things are disagreeing on what needs to happen. So we need to use skill and not force. The rider needs to compassionately observe the elephant's behavior, give solution-oriented feedback, soothe the emotional elephant's emotional distress, and help it learn experientially that something is not as big as scary as it may seem. So this is what we're essentially doing with the experiments that we're designing. We're showing our subconscious emotional elephant character that this thing that it perceives as such a huge threat, we're showing it in small ways, like actually maybe this thing is not as scary. So then it doesn't get as activated. It gets soothed emotionally and it's more willing to go in the path that you want it to go. So she calls it kind of like coaching. The rider is coaching the elephant. It's not trying to overpower or force the elephant to go where it wants to go and losing. So that is kind of the dynamic that we are learning. So that's just sometimes a helpful analogy to think about our behavior and why it might feel so frustrating and why it might feel so like difficult to go for the things that you actually want. And like I said, this is the work of adult psychological development. This is what we call self-authorship, where you are directing your life because you are learning how to navigate the tension of your own psychological immune system. You're not fighting it. You're not working against your brain, against your natural behavioral tendencies and trying to overpower that. You're working with your brain. And then the last thing we can use this analogy for is that little path. So we can shape the path, right? Because sometimes the elephant will just kind of follow whatever path it's already on. So how can you shape the path, which is essentially your environment? How can you shift and shape your external environment? That might be your physical environment, might be your mental environment, your relationships. How can you create an environment that is going to be very useful for your goals? And again, you can pause this for 2 minutes and just brainstorm anything that you feel would be helpful to achieving your goal that is in your environment. A very kind of common example, right? If there's certain foods that you don't want to be eating, you don't have those in your house, right? That's just an example. It's not always the best strategy, but that's just an example of how your environment can almost like you almost want to think of, I want to create an environment where the default option is that I move towards my goals instead of I have to fight against my environment all the time. So you can pause that and just brainstorm anything that comes up for you. By the way, one of the things I think is so fun in your environment is to have a visual reminder of what your goal actually is. So you can have, like, let's say you decided this year I'm going to get one of the coaches that I work with, I think it's 3 million steps is her goal this year. So she wanted to be more active. And so the goal that she chose was 3 million steps. And so she has visibly somewhere that says 3 million so that she is constantly reminded of that goal, right? Because sometimes that's also why we sort of like forget about our goal. We like get off track because we don't have this constant reminder. You almost want to put it as like, I never want to have the situation where I can pretend that I didn't set that goal. Because that's sometimes what we do as well. What goal? Especially when we perceive we're not gonna make it, we almost like pull back on it. We almost what they call like fail ahead of time. And one of the things is that we set up our environment in a way that we could forget, we could pretend, though we never set that goal. So that might be one of the things that you put in your environment. And then the last thing we're going to brainstorm here is just any other barriers that you perceive will come up along the way. This can be the weather. This can be certain days I'm probably not going to feel like doing this. I'm going to be on holiday in this time, right? Anything that you perceive is going to come up along the way that you could actually plan for ahead of time. And you can think of, if this happens, then X, or when I go on holiday, this is what I'm going to do, right? Like if I am having like weekly workouts, for example, like what is my plan for when I go on holiday, right? What is my plan when someone is visiting me and I maybe don't want to do that workout? What is my plan for if it's an outdoor workout when the weather is terrible, right? You can actually plan for these things ahead of time. Sometimes I ask this in the way of, if you had to think about a year from now and I asked you, did you achieve your goal? Did you do the thing that you set out to do? And you told me, no, I didn't. What are likely to be the reasons that you give me for why? And how can you plan for those things now? So you can pause this, brainstorm for 2 minutes on anything else that you feel might be a barrier. We worked mainly on the internal resistance, but you can look at any other barriers that you perceive coming up, or just, like special circumstances, like the holiday or someone visiting or whatever. And just write, if this happens or when this happens, this is what I'm going to do. This is my plan. All right. Okay. And the last one, we're just going to brainstorm a little bit about support. So we want to brainstorm relationships that are going to support you. You want to let the people around you know that this is what you're going for, right? You want to let them know how they can support you. Research shows that even if we don't call on people to actually help us, just knowing that there are people around us, people in our lives that will support us if we need them, has positive effects. So some sort of idea of the relationships that are going to be helpful for you in this. And that can be existing relationships that you maybe ask for certain things, or you let them know certain things about what to expect when you're pursuing this goal, or relationships that you have to build. Whether that's, like someone that has done this before and you want to build that relationship with them, that they maybe tell you what they did, or they have some sort of advice for you, or you can check in with them every now and then, that kind of thing. And then resources or investments. So brainstorming, like, what am I willing to learn and from whom, right? What do I need to read? What equipment do I need to buy? What courses do I need to buy? Again, this is not procrastinating. It's like, these are the things that really, like, I genuinely need these things in order to pursue my goal. We're not trying to put off the goal by just learning a little bit more, or taking another course, or like, I just want to feel more confidence, I'm going to take another course, right? What is genuinely necessary? Sometimes things like the equipment, buying stuff for my goals is like the most exciting part. But sometimes we do it in the opposite way, right? We do it as I've never been able to do this thing before, so I'm just going to buy this expensive thing, and maybe that will get me like doing the thing, right? Without doing the whole planning of the goal. So this is the other way around. We already are clear on what the goal is, and if there is anything that we need to buy, anything that we need to read, any other things that we need to learn, how can we do that? Yeah, so that's resources and investments. And part of the investment that you might be making is in something like a mentor or a coach. Like I have had a coach for, I think I haven't stopped having a coach since I had my first coach, but I have had a coach pretty much the whole time for the last few years. And I don't think I'll ever stop having a coach. Like it's one of the best investments that I have made for my career and for my goals. So maybe it's coaching, maybe it's mentoring, maybe it's buying something that you genuinely need. Maybe there genuinely is some sort of next degree or course that you need in order to take that step. But yeah, you can pause again, brainstorm for 2 minutes on any kind of support that you need, whether that's relationships or more resources or investments. Awesome. So yesterday I just mentioned that I will talk a little bit more about my work and what I do. So if what we've done over the last 2 days has really resonated with you and you're ready to invest in a coach, then I want to invite you to work with me one-on-one. So working with me as your personal health and career coach. So essentially we do this whole process, right? We are taking a step back. We're looking at what's important to you. I'm helping you clarify your priorities, your values, what kind of world you want to be contributing to. And then we're working on what are the behaviors that we need in order to do that. We're building the emotional and mental capacity in order to do that. We're looking at all those unconscious beliefs that you have. We're rewriting narratives that you have about yourself that are getting in the way of pursuing the things that you really want. We're addressing your fears that come up, the resistance that come up. We are, again, like creating new possibilities, new options for what you think you are allowed to do with your life or what you think is possible for you. We're no longer using your past to define what you can do in your future. We are rewriting all of that and designing that, creating that. Again, it's about that idea of self-authorship. I'm helping you get into the driver's seat of your life, your career, your health, and decide what do I really want and how can I go for those things, even when it might be uncomfortable, even when it might be difficult at certain times. So it's not only, for example, achieving this goal. Like maybe it's specifically that you want support on this goal, but you might have other things in your career path, in your life and health that you're going for. And again, it's like the same idea of it's not just about creating the outcome with coaching. It's about who you are becoming along the way. What skills are you learning? What psychological development are you creating through that process? What capacity are you creating through that process, right? So don't only imagine like just having the outcome of that, but also imagine becoming the person that creates that outcome and actually builds those skills, because that is what you have for the rest of your life. If you create a certain outcome or you make a certain decision or you decide to go for something in your life, you have the internal capacity of doing that thing, of creating that thing for the rest of your life. Even if the goal itself, the outcome is kind of fleeting, you have the who you became in the process, you have forever. So I work with clients for 6 months, and it involves essentially 2 layers. So it's your deep health, which essentially means health in every domain, your mental health, your emotional health, your relational health. And the other layer is your career path and fulfillment. And we are doing those 2 things, your health and your fulfillment, through the lens of adult psychological development. So that's the idea of self-authorship. And I like to think about it as, again, it's like it's a bigger lens for the work that you're doing. Yes, it might be this specific detail that you're working on. I want to you know, pursue this degree. I want to make a pivot in my career to something else entirely, or I want to set up my own practice, or I want to just, you know, be less stressed and burnt out. I want to overcome stress and burnout in my current job or position. Sometimes it's that specific outcome, but it's also about like the psychological development we need in order to do that is also the bigger lens that we're looking through when we do these things. So if you are wanting to work with me, what you'll do is email me. I have it on the last slide, but you can also just respond to any of the workshop emails and just give me 3 day and time combinations that work for you to do an hour call. And I will make myself available for one of those calls. So what we do on the consult, this is a consultation call, a free consultation call, where we get to talk about whether or not we're a good fit. So on that call, we do essentially like a history taking and diagnosis treatment plan kind of process, where I ask you a bunch of questions about what you're struggling with, what you're wanting to be different, how you're wanting to feel. And then we talk about what I think would be necessary in order to get you there. Like, what are the steps necessary in order to get you there? And then if that sounds like something you want to do with me as your coach, we can talk about the details of coaching, the logistics, and the pricing. So you can email me about that if you want to set up one of those consultation calls. It is something that is super valuable, even if you decide that you don't want to pursue coaching at that time. Just getting that essentially diagnosis. It's not a pathological diagnosis. It's not like this is what's wrong with you. It's just like, oh, I can see by where you are and where you're wanting to go, this is what would be necessary. So you have clarity on what is actually going on. Why are the things that I'm trying now not working for me? What do I need in order to get there? And so you have clarity and you have some direction, even if you decide that coaching is not a good fit for you, or even if we decide that. Okay, awesome. So here is my email address, but like I said, you can just email me by replying to any of the workshop emails. Thank you so much for joining me for this workshop. My voice is like gone now. That was a long time of talking. But thanks so much for joining me. This work really lights me up. And every time I do a workshop like this, I'm just reminded of the kind of clinicians that I work with and how incredible you all are. And like when you are a heart-centered clinician who really wants to create that world that she envisions, and you are moving towards that, it is so exciting. Thank you. I'd love to know if there's anything that stood out to you in this workshop. You can also email me about that, or anything that you still want to workshop on, brainstorm a little bit with me, or just have questions about anything that I said. We covered a lot in this workshop, and I was kind of touching on a whole bunch of different things that you can then go and flesh out a little bit more, that you can dive deeper into. But there's only so much we can do in 2 hours, right? So if you do need any more information on any of that, just let me know. Amazing. I think that is it. I will stop the recording now. Thank you, everyone, and I'll chat to you soon.